Welcome. I'm so glad you're joining us today because if you're listening to this right now, I know exactly who you are and what you're up against.
Oh, yeah. It's an intense time.
It is. You are a planner and you are intensely preparing for a massive professional milestone. You're likely staring down the barrel of your Canadian Institute of Planners oral entrance exam or, a similar major professional hurdle.
Right.
You're probably looking at just a mountain of readings, trying to memorize decades of theory, codes of practice, historical precedents.
It's overwhelming.
It's totally overwhelming, and we see you. So our mission in this deep dive is to take one of those absolutely foundational texts right off your plate. We're going to break it down so thoroughly that the concepts just become second nature to you.
That's exactly right. The text we're looking at today is a really seminal article by Jill Grant. It's titled, Rethinking the Public Interest as a Planning Concept. And I want to establish right away that understanding this material is about so much more than just memorizing a few definitions to pass the panel interview.
Yeah, goes way deeper than that.
It really does. This piece gets to the very core of the ethical justification for the entire planning profession. It attempts to answer why planners do what they do and how they justify the often massive life-altering impacts their decisions have on communities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you walk into any city council meeting or read any zoning report, you are basically guaranteed to hear one specific phrase thrown around like an absolute shield, right? The public interest.
Honestly.
Planners invoke it to legitimize their advice all the time. But what exactly is it? And the source text forces us to ask some genuinely uncomfortable questions about the profession here. Like, is the public interest just a convenient illusion? Is it a tool used by social elites to just maintain control over the working class? Or is it something only a trained expert can recognize? Or maybe it's a mandate to serve the most vulnerable people in a given society?
It really is the ultimate existential question for anyone in this field. I mean, your professional codes of practice explicitly mandate that you must consider the broader public interest in your daily work.
Right.
But as the literature points out, this concept is incredibly fluid. It's tenuous, highly context sensitive.
It changes depending on where you are.
Exactly. And when you are, our conceptualization of what is actually good for the public is always framed by a specific time and place. It reflects whatever cultural and professional values happen to be dominant at that exact moment.
Which is wild when you think about it.
Right. What one generation confidently defines as the absolute common good, the very next generation might look back on as a catastrophic mistake.
Yeah.
So we have to view this entire concept as an ongoing evolution of thought.
So let's trace that evolution. Where does this idea even come from originally? Because if we look at the formal historical definition in the text, it's actually incredibly dry.
Very bureaucratic.
Yeah, it basically describes the public interest as the objective of duly authorized governments carrying out activities necessary for the welfare of the community.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that early definition was very closely tied to the historical professionalization of the civil service.
The idea of the neutral bureaucrat.
Exactly. The original idea was that civil servants and government workers were supposed to be these perfectly neutral, benevolent actors. They were seen almost like scientists, right? Objectively working for the ultimate good of the state, totally separate from messy political squabbles.
But that feels incredibly naive, doesn't it? The idea that a government bureaucracy is just a neutral machine optimizing for everyone's happiness.
Huh.
When did the cracks in that foundation start to show?
Oh, very quickly. Critics began to argue fiercely against that sanitized view because they pointed out that government actions frequently do not reflect the universal common good at all.
Jock.
Right? Instead, the machinery of the nation-state often simply reflects the interests of capital or the interests of established social elites.
So it's protecting the people who already have the power.
Exactly. Think about it. When the state demands something extreme from an individual, like taking their family farm or their business through eminent domain to build a railway, they use the public interest as their ultimate ethical justification.
But whose interest is actually being served by that railway?
Exactly. The text introduces a critical phrase here for your exam to describe this dynamic. It calls the public interest a calculus for the distribution of benefits and costs.
Wait, a calculus? That makes it sound like a rigid math problem, like there's a specific formula you can just plug variables into?
It does sound mathematical, but it's actually a moral math problem. And there is absolutely no straightforward formula. Every time a city approves a new highway, they're essentially doing this calculus.
Weighing the pros and cons.
Yes. They're deciding that the quote-unquote, benefit of faster commutes for suburbanites mathematically outweighs the cost of bulldozing a specific, often lower-income, urban neighborhood.
And because there's no universal equation to prove who is objectively right in that scenario, the public interest is categorized in the literature as an essentially contested concept.
Yes, that's a huge term to remember.
Let's make sure we define that actually, because essentially contested concept sounds like pure academic jargon. What does that actually mean in practice?
Think of words like art or freedom.
Okay.
Everyone uses them. Everyone agrees they are incredibly significant and rhetorically powerful, but people constantly dispute their actual meaning and content.
Right, my definition of art might be totally different from yours.
Exactly. Some argue endlessly about the specific criteria needed to identify it, while cynics claim the concept doesn't even truly exist. That is an essentially contested concept.
Which brings us to the mid-20th century, a period the text describes as treating the public interest as almost a myth. And I find the 1950s era of planning history fascinating because planners back then seemed completely untroubled by these philosophical debates. They were just so unbelievably confident.
They really were. In the 1950s, there was this massive, broad, popular consensus that the public interest simply meant growth and progress. End of story.
Build more, build
Yeah.
faster.
Exactly. The post-war economy was booming, and the public interest was defined entirely as accommodating that rising affluence.
And we can see exactly what that extreme confidence led to physically. The text outlines how planners of that era advised governments to tear down what they labeled as blighted neighborhoods.
Whole communities just wiped out.
Yeah, they completely leveled historic areas to rebuild massive concrete civic centers. They designed vast highway systems with the explicit goal of strictly separating pedestrian and vehicular traffic. They genuinely believed they were engineering the perfect frictionless future.
And at the time, the planning profession showered these projects with awards and praise.
Mm.
But we have the benefit of hindsight now. Today, we look back at those exact 1950s solutions, and we recognize that they spawned a whole new set of catastrophic problems.
Like what specifically?
Well, those well-intentioned plans created endless, unsustainable urban sprawl. They created mind-numbing traffic gridlock. They resulted in completely sterile urban landscapes that destroyed community cohesion.
It's the classic urban renewal disaster.
Precisely. The colossal failure of urban renewal and those massive, isolated public housing towers completely exposed the fallacy of the post-war mindset. It proved that a single, unified public interest was a dangerous myth.
So if the 1950s planner was this unquestioned master builder, how did the profession react when the public started pushing back? Because the text highlights the 1960s as a major turning point, specifically pointing to Paul Davidoff and the rise of advocacy planning.
Yes, Davidoff is huge here.
And this is happening right alongside the civil rights movement and the feminist movement, right? Where marginalized groups are loudly saying, hey, your version of the public interest doesn't include us.
Exactly. Davidoff's work was a massive paradigm shift. Advocacy planning completely rejected the idea of a single monolithic public interest. Davidoff forced the profession to acknowledge that a city is made up of multiple competing interests.
So planning isn't a neutral science anymore.
Not at all. It involves raw, messy political choices.
Hmm.
Advocacy planners argued that professionals shouldn't pretend to be neutral. Instead, they should actively advocate for the specific interests of underrepresented groups, much like a lawyer advocates for a client.
That makes a lot of sense, but it also creates a huge problem for the profession as a whole. I mean, if planners finally admit they don't have some magical objective skill to ferret out the one true public interest, how do they legitimize their jobs?
That's the big question.
What are they even supposed to do when the mayor asks them for a recommendation?
That is the exact identity crisis that led to a major pivot in planning theory. Because the field could no longer agree on what the public interest was, mainstream theorists decided to focus entirely on how to find it. They shifted their focus to the process.
Okay, so this is where we get into theories that treat the public interest as a process, capital P.
Yes.
The literature points to thinkers like John Friedman, who argued that planning should be a form of mutual learning. And then there's John Forrester, who is huge in communicative planning.
Right. Forrester is essential reading.
Forrester argued that a planner serves the public interest through open, honest, and transparent communication. It's not about the planner drawing the perfect map in a back room somewhere. It's about the planner's responsibility to inform the public, to illuminate the options, and to truly listen.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is how this directly evolves into what we now call collaborative planning theory, which is incredibly dominant in the field today.
You see it everywhere.
Absolutely. In collaborative planning, the core belief is that stakeholders must work together to resolve their differences. And whatever consensus outcome those stakeholders eventually reach, that outcome literally becomes the public interest.
Let's ground this in a real-world scenario to make the distinction clear for the listener. Imagine a city wants to take away a lane of parking on a busy commercial street to build a protected bike lane. How does a process-oriented planner handle that?
Okay, so a strictly process-oriented planner wouldn't walk into the room and declare whether the bike lane is objectively good or bad.
To say it's neutral.
Completely. Their job is to rent out the community center, bring in the local business owners who want to keep the parking, bring in the cycling advocates who want the safety, and facilitate a dialogue.
Get everyone talking.
Right. And if the groups compromise and agree to build the bike lane but only on one side of the street, then that compromise is the public interest. The planner's role is radically redefined here. They are no longer the visionary expert. They are simply a neutral facilitator of dialogue.
Wait, but how realistic is a neat little win-win consensus in the real world? Like if a city needs to build a new landfill or a safe injection site, someone is going to lose. You can't compromise on half a landfill.
You really can't.
And beyond that, if a planner's only job is to guide a community meeting and pass the mic around, what specialized knowledge are they actually bringing to the table? Why do they need a master's degree for that?
You've just hit on the most critical critique of process theory. And it is something you absolutely must remember for your exam. If planners are merely process facilitators, independent professional expertise starts to evaporate.
It dilutes the profession.
Severely. And the text notes that this exact dilemma caused a severe professional panic. It sparked a renewed desire among planners to strengthen their standing through title restriction and licensing.
They needed to prove their worth.
Yes. They realized that if they wanted to protect their jobs and their status, they needed to prove they had a unique, specialized skill set that went beyond just hosting a polite town hall. They needed to reclaim the ability to define the public interest.
Which leads us to the pendulum swinging all the way back to the other side. Substantive theory. If process theory is all about the how, substantive theory is all about the what. Substantive theorists argue that the public interest does objectively exist, and that trained experts absolutely can recognize it by applying preferred planning principles.
Right. These theories essentially say, we actually do know what makes a good community, and we have the data to back it up. The planner defines the public interest by applying these preferred, substantive principles directly to the physical environment.
And the text gives us the two most prominent modern examples of this: new urbanism and smart growth. I mean, you see these terms in almost every modern official community plan today.
Oh, they're everywhere. Let's go back to your bike lane example. A substantive planner walks into that scenario with a very different mindset than the process planner.
How so?
The substantive planner looks at the data. They say smart growth principles dictate that reducing carbon emissions, promoting active transportation, and calming traffic are objective moral goods for the future of the city.
So they've already made up their mind.
Basically, they decide, therefore, the bike lane is in the public interest, regardless of whether the local business owners yell at me in a town hall meeting.
They define the common benefit through highly specific physical design choices. Substantive theories advocate for mixed-use developments, compact urban forms to prevent sprawl, transit-oriented development, highly pedestrian-friendly streets.
And we need to deeply understand why substantive normative theories like smart growth are so incredibly comforting to planners today.
Let's define normative really quickly. When we say normative theory, we mean a theory that prescribes how things ought to be, right? It's making a value judgment.
Precisely. It's a vision of an ideal future. And these theories are popular because they offer planners a clear, actionable checklist for professional authority.
It gives them a playbook.
Yes. If you build dense, mixed-use transit hubs, you are doing good planning. It cures that existential identity crisis we talked about. But, and this is crucial, as the source text warns, we have to be incredibly careful here.
Why is that?
Because unexamined normative theories promote a specific set of contemporary values as if they were universal, timeless truths.
Oh, just like the 1950s planners who thought bulldozing neighborhoods for highways was a universal, timeless truth.
Exactly. When you assume your current design trend holds the objective moral high ground, you inevitably elevate certain interests while completely demonizing others.
You create blind spots.
Huge ones. You might be designing a beautiful, walkable, eco-friendly neighborhood, but you might also be gentrifying the area so severely that the working class people you claim to serve can no longer afford to live there.
Which brings us to a fascinating, highly frictional part of the literature. Section 5, which deals with radical theory. Radical theory looks at both process theory and substantive theory and basically says you're both missing the point because the entire system is fundamentally rigged.
Yes, radical theory takes a much more aggressive stance. It argues that creating a just society is the ultimate public interest, and you can only achieve that by actively overcoming the hegemony of the powerful.
Hegemony is another one of those dense terms. In this context, it refers to the invisible power structures in society, right? The dominance of wealthy landowners or corporate developers whose interests are often accepted as just the normal way things are.
Exactly. Radical theorists argue that good communication, which process theory relies on, is practically useless if the power dynamics in the room are wildly unequal.
Right. A marginalized renter and a billionaire developer do not have equal voices in a collaborative town hall.
Not at all, no matter how good the planner is at facilitating. And conversely, radical theory argues that simply building better physical forms, like the substantive planners want, is not enough to overcome deeply entrenched economic oppression.
A nice sidewalk doesn't fix systemic poverty.
Exactly. Therefore, the radical planner's singular job is to put the needs of the most disadvantaged members of society at the absolute forefront of every single decision.
The text actually describes the radical planner as acting like a gorilla in the bureaucracy. That is an incredibly intense job description. What does that actually look like in practice?
It means actively fighting oppression from within the municipal or corporate system. It might mean a planner quietly helping a tenants' rights organization exploit zoning loopholes to stop an eviction. Or it might mean internally pushing back fiercely against a mayor's pet development project because it displaces unhoused people.
I imagine that is a very quick way to get fired.
Which is exactly why the text points out that very few practitioners actually select this path. Being a gorilla in the bureaucracy requires a level of constant, exhausting professional friction that most people simply cannot sustain over a 30-year career.
It's a lot to take on.
It's a vital theoretical perspective, but an incredibly difficult practical reality.
Okay, so we've covered a massive amount of ground here. We've looked at the history of the civil service, the 1950s myth of progress, the messy town halls of process theory, the design checklists of substantive theory, and the bureaucratic warfare of radical theory. So, what does this all mean? Let's bring all of this home to the reality of practice today. For a planner reading this text, how are they actually supposed to serve the public interest when they log into work tomorrow morning?
The synthesis of all this is that modern planners must act as highly transparent community advisors. Your job is to make values explicit.
Don't hide the ball.
Exactly. When you present a plan to a city council, you must illuminate the ethical choices embedded within that plan. You have to be deeply honest about the fact that planning involves hard political choices about the disposition of land and resources.
Because you can't please everyone.
You can't. Consensus is rare, and true win-win outcomes are almost non-existent. Resources are limited. Every time you draw a line on a map, someone benefits and someone loses. Your role is to expose the real, unvarnished issues and options for the decision makers, and crucially, for the people who will have to live with the consequences of those decisions.
So transparency is the ultimate currency here. We do not serve anyone's long-term interest by arrogantly presuming that we, as experts, hold the secret magic formula for the perfect community.
Exactly. Does this mean planners can't be visionaries? Not at all. But if you seek to implement a personal or professional agenda, even a well-intentioned one like smart growth, you are ethically obliged to do so explicitly.
You can't hide your design preferences behind a vague, unquestionable cloak of the public interest.
No, you have to clearly state why you believe your strategies are the right ones for this specific community at this specific time. And you must be humble enough to accept that history might eventually prove you wrong.
To really hammer home what happens when we lack that humility, the text provides a devastating, real-world case study. It looks at the United States, where planners decided to use new urbanist principles to rejuvenate massive public housing projects.
This is a perfect example of substantive theory colliding with reality. The planners looked at the data and said, high concentrations of poverty in isolated towers are bad. The substantive solution is to tear down the towers, build beautiful, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods, and mix in market-rate housing to economically integrate the area.
And on paper, that sounds like a massive win for the public interest. It aligns perfectly with modern best practices, but the text reveals the actual outcome. Because they replaced dense towers with lower density mixed income townhomes, the process resulted in a net loss of roughly 60,000 public housing units across the country.
It's staggering.
60,000 units of housing for the most vulnerable people just gone, all in the name of good design.
It is a profoundly sobering reality check. It proves that neighborhood renewal often heavily serves the interests of the middle class or developers, while deeply hurting the marginalized people it was supposed to help. The author leaves us with a truly powerful warning here.
What's the quote?
Planners who define the public interest in purely physical or design terms without rigorously calculating the social repercussions of their actions reap the whirlwind.
Reap the whirlwind. That is such a heavy, consequential phrase. It really underscores the gravity of the profession.
It does.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's synthesize this for the reality of your upcoming professional exam. When you are sitting in front of that panel, the worst thing you can do is try to recite one rigid dictionary definition of the public interest.
Absolutely not do that. They are not looking for a single sentence. They're looking to see if you possess critical historical understanding. You need to demonstrate to the panel that you understand the concept's complex origins, its historical flaws, the tension between process and substance, and its constant evolution.
You have to show you grasp the nuance.
Right. You should feel totally free to debate the concept with the panel. But you must demonstrate that you recognize the inherent ethical challenges in using the public interest to blindly defend any single position.
And beyond the exam, as you continue your career, the source material leaves us with a phenomenal, lingering question to mull over.
Yes, I love this part.
Yeah.
Think about this. If the public interest is constantly shifting based on who holds power, and it merely reflects our current temporary cultural values, will the very concept eventually be abandoned by the planning profession altogether?
It's thrown out completely.
Maybe. Could we see it replaced entirely by hyper-localized, block-by-block community agreements? Or conversely, will a new, unprecedented universal crisis, like the accelerating impacts of climate change, force us to abandon our differences and invent a single, unified, undeniable definition of the public interest once again?
That is an incredible thought experiment to chew on. And it is exactly the kind of high-level critical thinking that separates a good planner from a great one. To our listener, you have got this. We know how much time and effort you are pouring into your preparation right now, and we are wishing you the absolute best of luck on your exam. Trust the work you've put in, remember the historical nuances we explored today, and go show that panel exactly what you know. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the source material, and we will catch you next time.